Welcome to the Vital Spirit podcast. I'm Dr. Kelly Livingston, a naturopathic physician and your guide to a new health reality, one that connects body, mind, and spirit. Together, we'll dive deep into the art and science of holistic healing. Through working with hundreds of women through midlife transitions, I've discovered something profound. Most of our physical and emotional challenges are rooted in a maladaptive stress response. And true healing begins when we regulate our nervous system. Each episode will explore complex health topics in simple, empowering ways, uncover the deeper wisdom within each of us, and share practical tools for nervous system regulation to help you awaken your vital force and create lasting wellness. So, if you're ready to reconnect with yourself, your health, and your purpose, let's begin this journey together so you can experience life more fully human and deeply healed. Hi, and welcome to the Vital Spirit podcast. I'm Dr. Kelly Livingston. Before we drop into this episode, two things. First, if you've been enjoying the Vital Spirit podcast, please take a second to subscribe. And if you feel moved, leave a review. Reviews aren't just nice, they're how this message will travel, especially to women who feel like they're doing everything right and they still don't feel well. Second, I've made free companion downloads for this work, the Vagal Tone Guide and the Seeds of Health Journal. They give you simple, grounded practices to regulate your nervous system and build the foundation underneath hormone, gut, and mood healing. You'll find links to those in the show notes. And as you listen today, I want you to remember this. This isn't just information for you to consume, it's a signal. So let this episode be your sign to step outside, even briefly, and let your body receive what it was designed to receive. Take at least 5 minutes today to stand in the sun, even if it's 5 degrees out like it is here in Connecticut. And of course, dress appropriately, but please get a few minutes of sunlight today. And if you haven't listened to the previous episode, Sunlight as Medicine, I want you to pause and start there because vitamin D is not the beginning of this story. It's the downstream effect. So yes, today we're going to be talking about vitamin D and how it's not just something we measure on labs or supplement in the wintertime. It's a signal. It's a biological message that tells our body about light, safety, season, and rhythm. And when vitamin D is low or stubbornly low, despite supplementation, the most important question becomes not how much should I take, but what signal is missing upstream that's impacting my vitamin D levels. Today, we're going to talk about the physiology of vitamin D as a hormone, why it plays such a powerful role in immunity, mood, and midlife health, why it can often stay low despite supplementation, what labs actually matter, what labs should we be running if we think maybe our vitamin D is low on top of just vitamin D, and why vitamin K2 must be paired with vitamin D, especially as we age. I also will touch on the lack of insurance coverage for this test lately and why, frankly, this is a crime against preventive medicine. So did you know that vitamin D is actually not a vitamin? Vitamin D is technically a sequesteroid, not a vitamin. Vitamins are substances that we have to obtain from diet because the body cannot make them, and vitamin D does not fit that definition. Vitamin D is actually synthesized in the skin in response to UVB light. Here's how the physiology works. UVB light hits the skin. It converts 7-dehydrocholesterol into cholecalciferol. That compound is then converted in the liver to 25-hydroxyvitamin D, and then it's activated in our kidneys and immune cells into 1,25-dihydroxyvitamin D, which is the active hormone. So there's a lot of steps that go from sunlight to active vitamin D within our body. This was very clearly established in foundational work published in the New England Journal of Medicine, showing that vitamin D behaves as a hormone with endocrine, paracrine, and autocrine effects. Vitamin D receptors, which are called VDRs, are nuclear transcription factors, which means that vitamin D directly influences gene expression. And this is why it is so important. This is not about nutrients. This is a hormone signaling pathway, and it's driven by light. I think one of the most important things that modern research has really clarified about vitamin D is that it doesn't just support our overall health. It's regulating genes that are going to then determine how the body responds to inflammation, infection, and metabolic stress, all of which are very important in the work that I do with patients. This is the field of nutrigenomics, the study of how nutrients interact with gene expression. The vitamin D receptor actually acts as a gene transcription regulator, influencing hundreds of genes that are involved in your immune signaling pathways, insulin sensitivity, cell differentiation, inflammation control, and mitochondrial and metabolic regulation. So, large nutrigenomic reviews published in journals like Nutrients and Endocrine Review have shown that vitamin D status influences gene networks involved in cardiovascular disease, diabetes, autoimmunity, osteoporosis, and cancer. So, these are all things that my patient population is focused on when we work together. And this explains why vitamin D deficiency keeps appearing across seemingly unrelated diagnoses. Vitamin D certainly is not treating disease, but it helps to regulate the terrain in which disease develops. So, maintaining optimal vitamin D levels is truly preventive medicine. So, I want to talk for a minute about the latitude effect and autoimmunity. One of the most misunderstood aspects of vitamin D is its role in immunity. Vitamin D is not stimulating the immune system, but essentially it's educating it. So, vitamin D receptors are found on T lymphocytes, macrophages, dendritic cells. And what vitamin D is doing is it's suppressing excessive Th1 and Th17 inflammatory signaling while it's increasing regulatory T cells. And what this does is it essentially makes the immune system much better at distinguishing between threat and tolerance. So, this is really, really important when it comes to autoimmune disease and immunomodulation. Vitamin D promotes immune tolerance and reduces autoimmune reactivity. Studies have shown that it acts as a immunomodulator, not just an immune booster. So it's really modulating how your immune system is responding. And this is why low vitamin D is consistently associated with autoimmune disease risk, including risk of multiple sclerosis, rheumatoid arthritis, and Hashimoto's thyroiditis. Now, here's where it gets interesting. This is part of why I really want to live somewhere where I'm in the sun all the time. Humans who live closer to the equator, where UVB exposure is consistent year round, have significantly lower rates of autoimmune disease, particularly MS. This pattern is known as the latitude gradient. Rates of MS rise the farther that you move from the equator, especially in Northern Europe, Canada, and the Northern United States. This is one of the strongest epidemiological patterns in autoimmune disease. And large population studies have demonstrated this very clearly. We've seen that higher serum 25 hydroxyvitamin D, so those vitamin D levels when tested were associated with significantly reduced risk of developing MS, especially when adequate levels were present earlier in life. So what matters here is that it isn't just about supplementation. You cannot correct this with supplementation. But this is really about sun exposure. So, UVB driven vitamin D synthesis, immune calibrating signals, and circadian and seasonal entrainment, which we talked about in the sunlight episode, are clearly involved here. The immune system evolved under the sun, not under LED lights, right? Vitamin D is one of the ways that our immune system remembers where it is on the planet and whether it's safe to calm down or if it needs to be on high alert. Clinically, this reframes low vitamin D on autoimmunity, not as a simple deficiency, but as a mismatch between human biology and modern living. Now, here's something most people never learn. The skin is not just a barrier, it's an immune and endocrine organ. Keratinocytes in the skin produce vitamin D locally, and that locally produced vitamin D has paracrine and autocrine effects, meaning it acts right where it's being made in the skin. Dermatology and immunology research show that vitamin D produced in the skin supports antimicrobial peptides, it reinforces skin barrier integrity, it modulates local immune responses, and it regulates systemic inflammation before vitamin D levels even rise. So, this is another reason why supplements can't replace the full biological effect of sunlight that's occurring locally in the skin. because light isn't just raising your lab value of vitamin D, it's training the immune system at the level of the organ of the skin. Vitamin D receptors are also found throughout the brain, particularly in the hippocampus, the prefrontal cortex, and the hypothalamus. And vitamin D is playing a role in serotonin synthesis, neuroinflammatory regulation, and HPA axis signaling, which, if you've listened to any of our previous episodes, you know is so important for mood, right? One of my favorite papers on this topic shows that vitamin D regulates gene expression through tryptophan hydroxylase 2, which is the enzyme responsible for serotonin production in the brain. So, low vitamin D is really strongly associated with depression, and this is one of the reasons. A meta-analysis published in the British Journal of Psychiatry found that individuals with low vitamin D had significantly increased risk of depressive symptoms. And here's a reframe that really matters here. Depression is not simply a neurotransmitter deficiency, right? You can go back to our SSRI episodes, our inflammatory depression episodes, all of our depression series, and catch up on those, because it is often a biological conservation response driven by inflammation and perceived threat. And when inflammation rises, the brain downshifts energy use. And vitamin D is one of the signals that tells the brain whether it's safe to come back online or not. Low vitamin D does often accompany biological winter, whether that winter is seasonal, inflammatory, emotional, or chronic stress induced. So, yes, we'll see low mood in the winter when our vitamin D goes down, but you can also see low mood with inflammation, with emotional dysregulation, and with high stress load. And this is where we loop right back to that sunlight as medicine episode, because light exposure through the eyes is entraining that suprachiasmatic nucleus. Remember, it's regulating our cortisol rhythm. Our cortisol is so important for our mood, for our energy. It's synchronizing immune function, and it's influencing mitochondrial energy production. Vitamin D synthesis is time locked to your light exposure. So vitamin D interacts with your circadian rhythm through genes like your clock genes, which are influencing metabolic and immune timing. So again, you cannot fix a light-driven hormone in the dark, and you cannot fix a light-driven hormone just by taking a supplement. Supplements bypass that environmental signal, which is so key here. They are not entraining the rhythm. They're not informing the nervous system of that safety. And they're essentially not going to be as impactful or beneficial. Now, you might see your labs come up, which we'll talk about in a minute. But the key here is definitely getting outside and getting vitamin D from sunlight on the skin. Now, vitamin D becomes even more important in midlife and also harder to utilize because vitamin D influences estrogen receptor sensitivity. It's going to play a huge role in bone remodeling, muscle protein synthesis, and insulin signaling. Studies show that vitamin D requirements in postmenopausal women increase, but midlife also brings some barriers to that, such as reduced gut absorption, especially if there's inflammation in the gut, impaired liver and kidney conversion, especially if our detox pathways are compromised, magnesium deficiency, and chronic stress-induced receptor resistance. So this is why I often say that in midlife, the issue isn't just vitamin D deficiency. It's actually diminished responsiveness, even to supplementation, even to time outside. So why will vitamin D sometimes stay low even if we're supplementing? You might be one of those people who does check your vitamin D regularly and you supplement and it's always low. Well, lack of light exposure is number one. So the body still believes it's winter if it's not getting its skin exposed to the sun. If you don't have retinal light input, so if you're not looking at the sun, there's no circadian entrainment, there's no upstream signal to make vitamin D. Next, chronic inflammation will impact vitamin D as well. So, research describes vitamin D resistance in inflammatory states where vitamin D receptors are essentially less responsive despite adequate serum levels. Gut dysfunction can definitely play a role. Vitamin D is one of our fat-soluble vitamins. So number one, you should be taking it emulsified in a fat for absorption, but also it requires bile flow to be absorbed. It requires us breaking down that fat and digesting it and absorbing it. So if we have dysbiosis in our gut, remember that imbalance of good and bad bacteria, or say we have low stomach acid and we have fat malabsorption, this is going to interfere with our absorption of vitamin D as well. Mineral deficiencies can impact our absorption of vitamin D. So, for example, magnesium is required for vitamin D activation, transport, and receptor binding. So, this has been demonstrated in research. So, if you're low in magnesium, it's going to impact your vitamin D. And also, liver and kidney conversion issues can impact your vitamin D. So, stress, toxic burden, metabolic strain, and hormonal shifts are all going to impair conversion. So again, you could swallow, you could take in vitamin D, but you still have to be able to convert it. Now, what are some of the labs that you might run? 25 hydroxy vitamin D is the storage form of vitamin D. It does reflect exposure to light, intake, and absorption, but normal does not always mean optimal. You can download my lab interpretation guide, and you can also go to my lab ordering page via Rupa Health if you want to explore your vitamin D levels that way. 125 dihydroxy vitamin D is the active form of the hormone, and that can actually be normal or elevated even when storage levels are low. And this will especially be true in inflammatory or autoimmune states. You might also look into parathyroid hormone, calcium, and magnesium. An elevated parathyroid hormone often signals inadequate vitamin D, and magnesium, as we talked about, is kind of a non-negotiable for vitamin D conversion. You might also consider running some of those inflammatory terrain labs, such as high sensitivity C-reactive protein, HSCRP, and ferritin. You also might look into glucose or fasting insulin and gut health when indicated, because vitamin D, I think, should not be interpreted in isolation. You shouldn't just look at the number and say, oh, it's within range. What is within range anyway? I'm often saying that I like vitamin D to be at least a 70, and very often patients are coming in with it around a 35 and saying, oh, I was told vitamin D was normal. So we've talked about a little bit about why vitamin D matters, why it stays low. So let's talk about one of the practical questions everyone asks me. How do I actually raise it safely and effectively if it's so important for all these biochemical reactions in our body and our mood and our sleep and our hormone production and our immune function? Okay, well, what do I do about it, Dr. Kelly, right? So my answer is always going to be light first, supplementation second, as needed, and then food always supporting this all. So remember, vitamin D is made when UVB light hits bare skin. So this is not about excessive tanning. It's not about burning your skin all the time. Obviously, there are risks to that. This is about regular low dose exposure. So here are some general physiology-based guidelines. If you have fair skin, 5 to 15 minutes of midday sun on your arms and legs, and maybe even your trunk and torso is ideal. If you have medium skin tones, 15 to 30 minutes. And if you have darker skin tones, 30 to 60 minutes. This is without sunscreen initially, before burning occurs. Once your skin has received enough UVB light, the body naturally converts excess vitamin D precursors into inactive photoproducts, a built-in safety mechanism described in dermatology research. So yes, you don't want to burn. I'm not saying go outside and burn your skin. And yes, you need to know if you're someone that is going to be more prone to burning. We can have a whole episode on dietary antioxidants and how you can prevent burning from the inside out. But for now, the point is that if you have fairer skin, you will need less time in the sun. And if you have darker skin, you're actually absorbing less. So you will need a little more time in the sun to see an impact in your vitamin D levels. But the point is that you cannot overdose on vitamin D from sunlight. Again, don't burn, but you're not going to overdose on vitamin D. And that really matters. And season matters, latitude matters. In northern climates, UVB is largely unavailable in the winter. It's why so many of my patients struggle with mood in the winter. And between, I would say, October and March, supplementation is often necessary, especially if we've been tracking vitamin D levels. But even in the winter, outdoor daylight exposure still matters for circadian rhythm, like we talked about in the last episode, immune regulation, absorption and mood, even if vitamin D synthesis is limited. And that's why I always say sunlight is medicine, even when it's not making as much vitamin D. And I do not like being outside in the cold. Anyone that knows me really well finds it very funny how much I like to be outside in the sun, but how little I like the cold. So, yes, you might have to bundle up if you live around here. You might have to plan your travel around the winter and get some of that sunlight exposure somewhere warm, like I do, whatever works for you. Now, how do we supplement when needed? I know you're going to want to know this information, right? So, dose and form matter. General dosing guidelines, and again, I'm not your prescribing physician, but general adult guidelines will be for maintenance. You're going to do about 1 to 2,000 IUs of vitamin D daily. Lower levels, you're going to want to bump that up to 2 to 5,000 IUs daily. And if you are significantly deficient, you're going to bump that up even higher to 5 to 10,000 IUs daily. Again, it's fat soluble. You're going to want to make sure that you take that emulsified. You definitely want to support your fat absorption if you're someone who struggles with that, and you can track and monitor your vitamin D levels. Those tend to be safe dose ranges. Vitamin D toxicity can happen, but it's rare, and it's typically related to extremely high doses taken for prolonged periods of time without cofactors such as K2 and magnesium. Now, you want vitamin D3, cholecalciferol, and as I said, you want oil-based or emulsified so that it is absorbed better. I tend to rely on liquid or soft gel forms because they're better tolerated and better absorbed. You don't want to rely on D2 alone, and you don't typically want to do mega doses. I find that consistency is key here. And I think cod liver oil deserves its own little mention here. It's a wonderful natural source of vitamin D. It also has vitamin A, which synergizes with D, and it provides omega fatty acids, which support inflammation regulation. It's one of the oldest traditional remedies for bone, immune, and nervous system health. And there's a reason it's stood the test of time, I think. For cod liver oil, I'm typically dosing around 1/2 to 1 teaspoon daily, sometimes more. It does have that vitamin A, so you have to be aware of that. And utilizing high quality tested sources. And clinically, I find it works really, really well for kids. It's a great addition if you can get them to take it. Some of them actually don't taste terrible. They have flavored lemon or orange flavor cod liver oil. And it's really great for patients with a mild deficiency or individuals who don't tolerate capsule supplementation very well. So it's utilizing food as medicine, and it can be a wonderful tool. I will say that food alone is rarely enough to correct a vitamin D deficiency, but it does still matter. And some dietary sources outside of that cod liver oil are going to be fatty fish like sardines, mackerel, herring, and wild salmon, egg yolks, which of course you want to make sure are organic and pasture raised, and sun exposed mushrooms are going to be a small source of plant vitamin D. So in putting this all together, a simple hierarchy that you can follow along with to support your vitamin D levels would be daylight, daylight, daylight. Exposure in your eyes first thing in the morning for 15, 30 minutes if you can, and exposure on the skin if you can get out midday, and follow along with what I said earlier about whether or not you have fair skin or darker skin, and keep track of how long you've been outside. Basically, don't burn, but get your skin exposed to the sun. Second would be targeted supplementation. So know your vitamin D levels, test your levels, and use supplementation when needed in appropriate doses. And make sure that you have those cofactors on board, such as magnesium and K2. And then use your food sources to boost your vitamin D additionally on top of those strategies. But again, most importantly is get outside. Because vitamin D is not just a reflection of our intake, it's really a reflection of our relationship with light, nature, rhythm, digestion, minerals, and inflammation. Now, if you've been paying attention, you're probably like, well, why do we need K2? And a lot of my patients who do research on their own, especially women who are curious about bone density support, always want to know, Dr. Kelly, do I need vitamin K with my vitamin D? So vitamin D increases calcium absorption, and vitamin K2 directs where that calcium is going to go. So K2 activates something called osteocalcin, which moves calcium into the bone. And that's why if you're going to take vitamin D as you get older, it's important to combine with vitamin K. It's also going to keep calcium out of your arteries and soft tissues. So, combining K2 with D is going to improve bone strength and reduce vascular calcification. So, this really matters with age as estrogen declines and your cardiovascular risk increases. So, we touched on how low levels of vitamin D are associated with depression, autoimmune disease, an increase in respiratory infections. D had its heyday during COVID, right? Everyone was asking me, should I be taking vitamin D? Bone loss and fracture risk, insulin resistance, and cardiovascular disease. So these are often talked about as non communicable diseases, but they're not random illnesses. These truly are expressions of long term regulatory breakdown, loss of rhythm. That's key. You're going to hear me say that all the time. Immune tolerance, metabolic flexibility, and environmental feedback. So vitamin D doesn't just point to one disease, even though I did mention that research on MS and autoimmune disease, right? But when it's low, it points to a system that's lost its signals, it's lost its rhythm, and it's lost its communication. And this is going to be detrimental for a number of downstream diseases. Which brings me to a topic that makes me really, really frustrated. And that's that many insurance plans no longer cover vitamin D testing. When I first started running labs 15 years ago, it wasn't as much of an issue to get vitamin D covered by insurance. And so I typically have to do a really good job of coding to get this covered for patients. As I said before, I do offer a lab shop where I offer you as a non-patient can order labs. I don't mark them up. If you want to run vitamin D, it's very affordable. I just feel like if you have insurance, it should cover something as important as vitamin D. We're talking about a hormone that regulates immunity, mood, bone health, inflammation. So not covering this test is not saving costs, in my opinion, because it is required for prevention and optimal health. So if you have insurance coverage, tell your insurance carrier that you want things like vitamin D covered. And remember, if your vitamin D is low, and especially if you're struggling improving those vitamin D numbers on labs with oral supplementation, remember, vitamin D is information that we receive through light. And sometimes the body is not deficient, it's actually disconnected from nature. So if this got you motivated to get outside, please do one of these three things to support the podcast. One, you can subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. Two, you can leave a review because it helps the podcast reach more people. And three, you can share this episode with a friend who needs to hear that her body is not broken, it's responding to the environment. And don't forget the most important thing that I want you to do today, and that is to go outside. Let your eyes and your skin receive real daylight and real vitamin D information, and let your nervous system remember its rhythm. You can go and download the free Vagal Tone Guide and the Seeds of Health Journal to get started today, and I'll see you next week.